like
Oh,
this. So we've got about 153 attendees at the moment, and we're waiting for the numbers to hit 400 to 500 because over 650 people have registered. So I think the system's just a little bit slow leaving people in. We should be starting in the next couple of minutes. I'm very sorry for those who are waiting.
No worries.
Okay, I think we're going to start in about a minute now. We're just waiting for Craig to join us, and then we should be ready to go. I think I've just received a message. Thank you to the person who sent the message online that people have difficulty joining in. Should be ready to go because the system's a bit slow. I thank you very much for that. I've just received a message. Thank you to the person in just who a sent couple the of minutes, and message sound will online be that on then. people have difficulty joining in. Should be ready to go
because
the system's a bit slow.
for the
Thank
speakers,
you very
please
much
note
for
that
I've just
on
received
the
a
Q&A
message
tab
to the person
at
who
the
sent
bottom
the
of your
message.
page,
Sound will be on
people
then.
have started to put,
should be ready because the system's
and
a bit
just
slow.
for questions,
Thank you very
please
much
we
for that.
don't ask you
On
to
the
answer them at the
Q&A
moment.
tab
I'll give
at
us
the
the
bottom
bottom
of
of
your
your
page.
page.
Sound will be on
People
there.
have
But
started
if you want to
take a quick look as we go through the
we don't
meeting.
ask you to answer them at the moment. Their questions from somewhere directed at you. But if you want to take a quick look as we go through the meeting. We don't ask you to answer them at the moment. Their questions from somewhere directed at you. But if you want to take a quick look as we go through the meeting. We don't ask you to answer them at the moment. Their questions from somewhere directed at you. But if you want to take a quick look as we go through the meeting. Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us at this Free the Truth event in defense of Julian Assange. We are commemorating a year since Julian was brutally dragged out of the Ecuadorian Embassy, and when his rights to asylum, his rights to citizenship were violated so grossly by the British state. We are also just about a year over the release, about a week over the 10-year date of the release of the collateral murder video, which is one of the most gruesome and among the more gruesome videos that we have seen in terms of the carnage that is unleashed by the American state against ordinary people and the crimes that the state commits in our name. Today we have a wonderful panel, and I'm very pleased to welcome Kristen Hrafnsson, Stefania Maurizi, Peter Oborn, Andrew Feinstein, Catherine Brown, and Chris Williamson. Also joining the panel, commenting on the questions and answers is Professor Ian Munro. Craig Murray is due to join us. I think Craig's having technical difficulties. Hopefully he will join us shortly. We're going to start with, without too much ado, and we're going to talk to Kristen Hrafnsson, who is an Icelandic investigative journalist, voted 3 times Icelandic Journalist of the Year. He's editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, as many of you know. Kristen learned about censorship, I think, firsthand when he was working on the Kaupthing case. And he also went to Iraq to investigate the collateral murder video and really locate the children who were involved and deprived of their childhood in some ways. And Kristen's going to tell us a little bit about the case more generally, but also talk a little bit about what's going on in relation to America. So, Kristen, over to you.
Thank you, Deepa, and thank you everybody for joining this meeting. I wish the occasion was more joyful than commemorating a year now since Julian Assange was in the despicable manner dragged out of the Ecuadorian Embassy.
The recording has stopped.
into the Belmarsh Prison. Shortly after that happened, of course, we saw the indictments that we had been expecting for 10 years. They materialized in a shocking manner. 18 accounts, 17 of whom were on the basis of the Espionage Act. And in the entirety, this amounted to 175 years in prison. Now, of course, this is one of the gravest attacks on journalism in my time and probably in my lifetime. I have never seen anything like it, and hopefully I will never see anything like it. It has to be resisted on all fronts, not just because of Julian Assange, because of journalism, which I really feel strongly about in this world, as to keep our world sane and our democracy alive. Now, in this year, of course, we have seen a process which is quite extraordinary in the UK, in a country that we believe is civil, which is probably among most people is viewed as having a robust and fair justice system. After all the experience in the last 12 months, I beg to differ, and it is obvious to everybody who has followed the events that this is certainly not the case in the case of Julian Assange. The case of Julian Assange is a test case. It's a test case in so many ways. Now, journalism is on trial. Of course, all this was pertaining to the releases of 2010 and 2011, releases who were exposing war crimes and wrongdoing and exposing corruption in the US in relation to the rest of the world. There is no doubt in my mind that now is the time for revenge. It is not a question of getting any justice. It is raw power being used in a deadly manner. It is like a drone attack by legal means. It is the same element that was used in the assassination of Soleimani in Iraq. It is the same element that we are now seeing more and more when it comes to the United States and its foreign policy. It has lost its legitimacy. It is now simply attacking with brute force on all fronts. And it's scary, and it should be scary to everybody, and it should be recognized by everybody. Now, who can we rely on? Because Julian Assange is a political prisoner, for certain. There is no doubt about it in anybody's mind who actually just looks at the elements of the case. But who can we rely on for support? What about the left? What is left of the left? If we look across the ocean to the United States, we see that Joe Biden is probably going to be the one that the Democratic Party is going to put forth the next fall to try to topple Donald Trump. Joe Biden is the person who in 2010 called Julian Assange a high-tech terrorist, among many others. I don't think there is any way that you could look at any positive thing coming from that individual and that office and that party in the event that there is a change in the White House after the election next fall. On the UK front, we have a new leadership in the opposition. Keir Starmer is now taking leadership in the Labour Party. He was, of course, the head of the Crown Prosecution Service at the time when that office was actively engaging in a conspiracy, I would say, to try to stall the forward moving of the Swedish case. We have evidence, which of course Stefania will discuss in details after me, that the office under Keir Starmer was basically working its best to stall the case and working against Julian Assange in every way. What can you expect from Keir Starmer? He was asked whether He thought it was he opposed the extradition of Julian Assange, and he replied somewhat in the manner verbatim that he had faith in the UK justice system and it had to have its course. I do not share that faith, and on the very grounds of having seen so many things in the courtrooms in the UK in the last 12 months especially, that I am stunned. We've seen a judge call Julian Assange a narcissist, a judge who has never seen or met Julian before, only actually heard him say his name and date of birth. That's it. We heard another judge say similar things and then sentence Julian to probably the harshest sentence for breaching bail in UK history, an unheard of sentence. Another judge dismissed everything that was presented as a mitigating elements. For example, when referring to the United Nations distinguished working group on arbitrary detention that found that Julian had been arbitrarily detained. The judge simply said that the UN rulings by this Geneva-based body had no bearing in his courtroom. Similar dismissal has been pointed towards what Niels Meltzer has said about Julian in his case, the foremost authority on torture in the UN body. So the United Nations do not have any bearings in the UK courts, neither actually do the rulings from the European Court of Human Rights when it was presented that keeping Julian Assange in a glass cage had been actually addressed, a similar case in Strasbourg, where it was found that it was against human rights principle and the charter to have the situation in that manner. Totally dismissed without a second look, or probably without a first look as well. So faith in the justice system, not really, not in my heart. And what we've seen, of course, from the magistrate court, Vanessa Barretzer, has been absolutely shocking and shameful. She has, from the outset, made it absolutely clear that she will try to find anything in order just to support the rubber stamping of the extradition for Julian Assange. There is no hope left to try to persuade that woman. She has frequently dismissed strong arguments. She has, on more than 2 occasions, probably 3 occasions, brought pre-written rulings into court before she heard the arguments. On 2 occasions, you might have a little sympathy because she got sent earlier the day or the day before some written submissions. But on the 3rd ruling, she had seen nothing. It still came with a pre-written ruling into the courtroom. So it's a show trial. Julian Assange is a political prisoner who is facing and enduring a show trial in a UK court. That is shocking, and it should be shocking. Barretzer has denied Julian not just to sit with his lawyers. She has denied him bail, even when facing the serious dangers that we are now facing, everybody in our society, and especially the prisoners, for the simple reason that, as every epidemiologist will tell you, these are prisons are like petri dish for viruses and pandemics. We are seeing examples of cruise ships where 80–90% of passengers are within days infected. The same applies to actually aircraft carriers. We saw one of the biggest aircraft carriers in the United States having to dock because of it spread like fire, the COVID inside the ship. And of course, the same applies to the prison, and we are not getting truthful and accurate information of what's going on in there. We know about 2 deaths. Those only one has been acknowledged, but we know of 2. And the case is, of course, much more than the one that has been reported, for the simple reason that nobody is tested unless he falls gravely ill. If you show any symptoms, you are thrown into a separate community within the prison, which means that nobody dares to cough inside the prison, because if you get a common cold or a regular flu, you will end up being put in with prisoners who have tested positive and will most surely get it, which is outrageous. Now, going back to the court case, of course, it was outlined in the first part of the hearing in February, all the arguments that are for the dismissal of the extradition request. They are so many and so strong that individually, all the arguments should suffice, individually and separately, to dismiss that extradition, let alone bundling them all together. The health reason, the fact that espionage is not an extraditional offense according to the bilateral treaty between the two countries on extradition. But let me dwell on one thing. It is the spying on the legally privileged conversation that Julian had in the prison, in the Ecuadorian embassy. If we go back a little bit, just to put the context right in that case, in 2017, WikiLeaks released an information about the online arsenal that the CIA had at this disposal to make online attacks. It was not a highly recognized release. It didn't get much traction, but it was surely noticed inside the CIA. And it was an extremely embarrassing period for the CIA at the time. The director at the time was Mike Pompeo, of course, and he went in an unprecedented manner in his first speech as a CIA director. He went into the podium and outlined who the main enemies of the USA were. They were Al-Qaeda on one hand and WikiLeaks on the other. And he called WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service. At that point, we knew what was coming. What does it mean when you brand a media organization like that? It means that every medicine is now okay. You can apply whatever means you have at your disposal to basically take down that organization. It didn't result in an outcry, which was, of course, one of the shameful things about the media, that how silent they were about criticizing all this. And the media has been complicit in many things. Only came to life a little bit last year when they saw the indictments and the severity of it. And it's not because of that they were so passionate about saving Julian Assange. They were simply seeing how close to home this all was. We're talking about the media partners that we worked with. Now, we now know through Spain and this case in Spain that this is extensive spying was done by the CIA in the Ecuadorian Embassy. This was all financed by a person, Adelson, who is the biggest financial backer of Donald Trump, and reportedly Mike Pompeo in his bid for a Senate seat next fall. Now, I know that my time is over and I shouldn't talk for more than 10 minutes. So we have a very grave situation at our hands. A year ago, we had to start out campaigning to save Julian Assange's life. A lot of people thought we were overly dramatic at the time. Of course, we were not, but nobody is doubting that today. And there are so many things that are combined in the Julian Assange case that this is so much more than the case of an individual who has a partner, children, a grand family. It is so much more that is sort of entwined in this case, which should let us all come together in fighting for his freedom. And now it is not just a question of trying to do that in the next few months. Every day counts now, and Julian Assange must be set free immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. And thank you to all those people who've joined slightly late as well, because I think there were some difficulties for people to get in. We have I believe over 100 people on each on 2 other different YouTube streams, and another 27 or so watching our consortium. So we have a few hundred people around the room. So I'm going to try and stick to time, but just a few administrative health warnings, which I forgot to give at the start of the call. Firstly, if you hear a fire alarm, please run out. It's in your house, it's not here. Secondly, just very quickly, in terms of the hashtags for today's event, we'll be using hashtag #FreeTheTruth. So if you want to tweet about it, please use the hashtag so we can collate all the information that you tweet. In terms of question and answers, please post your question and answers in the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. The speakers are looking at the Q&A window if you're directing specific questions to them, and we'll pick them up as we go along towards the end of the meeting, and we will try as much as we can to respond to all your questions, although and if we can't get through any of them, we can always pick them up separately. As someone who was actually in court earlier this week and watched British Open Justice again in action, and also who has been somebody who's been involved in coordinating the International Jurist Letter, it strikes me that the way in which British justice is being delivered seems to be entirely run in a way that always seems to make mistakes or have problems which relate to undermining Julian's conditions, especially at a time of COVID when Julian has a chronic lung condition since 2012. We know he has had mental health issues related to depression. We know that witnesses cannot attend his trial in May, which is now, of course, according to the judge, scheduled to go ahead as planned. We know that his lawyers are having difficulty communicating with him. They are, the video link room is in a shared space. So if you have a lung infection or a susceptibility to lung infections and you use a shared space at a time of COVID, you can imagine how worrying that is. They're also not able to meet with him due to the lockdown at Belmarsh. They are not able to post things to him. Things are not reaching him in the post. It's taking 8 to 10 days to reach him, and they're not sure if it's reaching them, and they're not really able to communicate with their client in a very complex case, about 40,000 pages worth of documentation in their submissions at a very crucial time. And Julian is not being afforded equality of arms in this. And so this is a very crucial time for those of you who are in the audience to join the struggle. Those of you who have already contributed to struggle, we're very grateful for your support, and we hope you will continue to join us at these events, so that while they can shut us down and not allow us to congregate outside Belmarsh or outside the courts, and they will shut down our voices in much of the mainstream media, somehow or other we will try and break through and free Julian Assange. Our next speaker is Stefania Maurizi. I'm very glad to welcome you, Stefania. Stefania is an Italian investigative journalist who works for Il Fatto Quotidiano. She's the one who obtained the emails showing how the CPS interfered with the Swedish investigations, and Paul Close helped to prolong for over a decade what was never charges, was only preliminary investigations into sexual assault allegations, which neither does justice to the victims of the sexual assault, nor does justice to somebody who cannot clear his name because he cannot go to court. And we'd like to hear a little bit from Stefania about the 4 freedom of information type requests that she has submitted. I wanted to let you know in advance that Stefania has requested that, because she's attending this purely in a capacity of providing information about the freedom of information requests, there is a limited number of topics that she can respond on during this call. And our other speakers have very kindly agreed to pick up on any of the other issues that are brought up in relation, that you might want to bring up with Stefania, but we cannot answer on this call. So thank you, and over to you, Stefania.
Thanks to you, everyone. And can you hear me? Okay. So yes, I'm let me clarify why I really care to speak out about Julian Assange, about the WikiLeaks journalist, because after Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks journal will be the next. I refer to Christine, I refer to Joseph Farrell, I refer to Sarah Harrison. So if Julian Assange gets extradited to the US, it's very likely that they will be the next and all the other WikiLeaks journalists will be the next. So why I feel the duty to speak out. I feel the duty to speak out because I have spent the last 11 years working on the secret documents of WikiLeaks, publishing the very same documents they have published for my newspaper, initially the leading Italian news magazine, L'Espresso, then the leading Italian daily La Repubblica. Today I'm contributing to Il Fatto. And I published the very same documentation, never had any trouble. No one ever questioned me, no one arrested me, no one put me in prison, no one put me into the condition of seeking protection in an embassy and remaining there confined for 7 years without even an hour outdoors. So, I mean, I really cannot accept this double standard where I was able to publish the very same documents they did without any trouble. And basically, they made Julian Assange's life horrible. I mean, he's taking the heat for all this publication. And we journalists who published the very same documents haven't have any problem. You know, so I cannot accept this, you know, as a journalist. I have a professional conscience and I have an ethical conscience. This is why I feel the duty to speak out, and I wonder how many dozens of journalists who work on these documents have got huge scoops. Thanks to Julian, thanks to WikiLeaks, are silent. I really cannot accept this. I really feel a sense of decency of speaking out because I cannot accept this double standard. I cannot accept that one of the most important journalist sources of all times, Chelsea Manning, has spent 8 years in prison. She tried to commit suicide 3 times. You know, one of the most important journalistic sources of all time. How can you accept this? How can you be silent, you know? And so I have seen Julian Assange suffering a lot, both inside the embassy, when I was trying to alert people about how his health was collapsing. And imagine what it means to remain confined in a tiny buildings. When I mentioned he was confined in an embassy, people think about embassies like magnificent buildings, very with prominent gardens, like maybe the U.S. Embassy in London or the U.S. Embassy in Rome. But the Ecuadorian Embassy was a very small building. And so I witnessed this huge suffering. And we never try to alert people, when we never try to alert colleagues. They were dismissing this, and they were saying he's spending his he's basically want to remain inside the embassy because he could step out anytime he wants. And I was saying, no, he can't. That's why the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention established that he was arbitrarily detained since 2010. And when in 2015, I realized basically I was trying to get deep understanding of the case. And I was asking colleagues, do you know what is going on in Sweden? And I realized that no one had a clear idea about this case. No one had ever tried to get the documents, which for me was unacceptable. How can you work as a journalist without trying to get proper access to the documents? You cannot, because as journalists, we are required to get the facts. So it was at that point in 2015 that basically I realized that it was important to try to get the documents using the Freedom of Information Act in Sweden, because Sweden is an open jurisdiction when it comes to freedom of information. And I played some tactics. So my strategy was, if I can get anything from Sweden, because Sweden is rather open jurisdiction, then I can use whatever I get from Sweden to get documents from the UK, because UK is not as open when it comes to Freedom of Information Act, is not as open as Sweden. And it worked. It worked because initially the Swedish authorities were collaborative. Initially, they provided 226 pages, few pages actually, but really important, because those pages contain some of the most important information we have on the case. Some of them, for example, how the UK authorities at the Crown Prosecution Service were calling the shot in the Swedish case, which for me it was really surprising, why the UK authorities were calling the shot in the Swedish investigation, why they were basically telling the Swedish prosecutor, don't come to London to question him. Question Julian Assange only after his extradition. And don't drop the investigation. When in 2013, the Swedish authorities were considering to drop the investigation, the UK Crown Prosecution Service was telling them, don't you dare get cold feet. So again, what kind of special interest they had in this case? If this was just a sex case, if it was just a Swedish investigation on sexual allegation, what was the special interest from the UK authorities on this case? So initially, the Swedish authorities were fully collaborative initially. Maybe they underestimate my request. Maybe they were thinking, well, she's an Italian journalist, who cares about what she publishes in a foreign language, and very few can understand. Maybe it was this way. Maybe someone inside the UK, the Swedish prosecution authority disagree with the approach of the Swedish prosecutor Marianne Nee. That's why maybe I got the document. I don't know why I got those crucial documents, but as a matter of fact, I got those documents, 226 pages, and after that, the Swedish prosecution authority stopped any collaboration. Because why? Because at that point, the UK authorities were telling them, well, you should consider whether you have to release these documents, because we are part of this process. So maybe you should have consulted us before releasing this document to her. And at the same time, the UK authorities were denying me the documents, and I brought them to the tribunal and I started suing them. That's why the UK authorities were telling the Swedish prosecution authority, maybe you should consult us before releasing these documents. So since then, I never stopped this litigation. I'm still fighting. I'm still in the London tribunal trying to get these documents. You have to realize that I was even unable to get the exact number of pages of these documents. I asked both the prosecution authority and the UK authorities, could you please provide the exact number of pages of the Assange file? So the Swedish said, we can't, because these documents are available only in electronic format. And I asked the UK, and they said, we can't, because these documents are available only on hard copy, and which is really weird, because they are, they are corresponding. So if one side corresponds in electronic form, the other side should have the electronic form. I mean, so anyway, they denied to provide the exact number of pages, but the UK authorities provided an estimate, and they said between 2010 and 2015, we exchanged something like 7,200 and 9,600 pages with the Swedish prosecution authority. Well, you have to realize that after 5 years fighting this litigation with my lawyers, I have 7 lawyers in 4 jurisdictions: Sweden, 1 in Sweden, 2 in the UK, 2 in the US, 1 3 in the UK, 1 in Australia, 2 in the US. You have to realize that after 5 years fighting this Freedom of Information Act litigation, I only got 779 pages. So just the tip of the iceberg. I'm still fighting for getting all the documents, after 5 years. You have to realize that in the US, our colleagues at the Washington Post were able to get documents about the Afghan war in just 3 years. 3 years. After 5 years, I just got 779 pages, and they have thousands, tens of thousands and thousands of documents about this case, which they don't want to reveal. Why? You wonder why. In some of these documents, crucial documents, have been destroyed by the UK Crown Prosecution Service. Again, why? Why did they destroy the documents? Which is basically, these are documents about an ongoing investigation, very controversial, very high profile. Why did they destroy? They didn't want to provide exact information on the destruction of email. And the Swedish prosecutors, who still keep these documents, because the UK has destroyed these documents, but the Swedish still have these documents, they refuse to provide me a copy of the documents. So what do they want to hide about this case? This is all on my side.
Thank you, Stefania. That's just great. And you talked about a professional conscience. And I think it's important to acknowledge at this time the professional conscience, which has caused doctors for the doctors who've come together under Doctors for Assange as the banner, and also the lawyers, the jurists, the judges, the retired and current legal practitioners, the academics, who've all come together under a banner to discuss the legal aspects of this case and talk about how to uphold the law across 2 groups, including one which provided the International Jurists Letter earlier this year, and another which is working under a banner called Lawyers for Assange. We'd also like to acknowledge somebody who's not on this panel today, whose professional judgment I think we have all greatly valued, and this is the absolutely courageous Neil Smeltzer, whose work has really helped to move the case along and to get the Swedish prosecutors to recognize the kinds of injustice they are causing to Julian. So thank you, Stefania, for that. Our next speaker is going to, we've had a very deep dive kind of discussion with Stefania and Kristen, and now we are moving to an academic in the area of English literature, Catherine Brown, who's a senior lecturer in English at the New College of the Humanities. Catherine's going to tell us a little bit about how in Julian's case, there has been a weaponization of positive ideals towards negative ends. And she's going to take us back to the big picture, really, in terms of the case. And I'm going to be a little bit passive aggressive and mute any of the speakers who are not already on mute. And over to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I'd like to focus on us, really, the supporters of Assange. There's a couple of hundred of us here on this platform. We hear from Deepa that there's a few hundred more elsewhere. That's great, but we are not more than that. And really what I'd like to think about in my time is why that might be. So as Deepa said, I want to talk about the perversion of good impulses to negative ends, or as the proverb has it, the road to hell being paved with good intentions. In Assange's case, I'm thinking of people of goodwill who condemn rape, who criticize patriarchal distortions of the police and of the judiciary, who believe that publishers have a duty of care to those about whom they publish, that political asylum should not be abused to escape justice, that recipients of asylum should not abuse their host's hospitality, that states have not just a right but a duty to keep certain things secret for their people's safety and in order to reduce conflicts, and which of us is not one of those people? Yet it's likely that most of us here today also believe that Julian Assange should be released immediately and that it's a priority to campaign for that. For other people, there is a contradiction between those two positions. And the difference between us lies, I think, in these three things. First, we keep in mind that even were Julian Assange a Russian-backed, US-hacking, Trump-supporting, life-endangering, justice-evading, excrement-smearing rapist, there have been perversions of the law in the handling of his case. He is being psychologically tortured, and he's being unnecessarily placed in physical danger by the state, all of which would still, in that scenario, be outrageous abuses. Second, we are in possession of different, that is to say, accurate and fuller information, which indicate that Assange is none of the things I've just listed. For example, on the Swedish rape allegations, the excellent UK campaign group Women Against Rape has long argued that these have been manipulated to political ends in a manner which has nothing to do with the protection of women. But why have we taken the interest and the care to look beyond the mainstream media, which is what we've had to do in order to access this information and rely on people such as Stefania? I suggest that it has something to do with how we handle our own idealism. So this is where I really zoom out. Human history makes clear time and again that idealism can lead to bad things. Ends can be used to justify means, collateral damage can be justified by intended damage and by the goals that supposedly justify that. One type of good can be seen to trump others, as we saw in the French and Russian revolutions with their justified terrors and their virtuous torturers. Whereas in fact, different goods can exist in an apparent tension that we need to negotiate carefully, never forgetting the individual. Never forgetting that although millions of rich people, white people, Christians and men have for centuries oppressed millions of poor people, non-white people, Jewish people, and women, it is not necessarily the case that any given rich person, white person, Christian, or man is necessarily guilty of any related charge. The belief which is still out there that Assange is guilty of rape because rape was alleged of him, therefore has kinship with the revolutionary terrors, because in both cases, collective justice annihilates individual justice. Ideals become particularly dangerous when they are manipulated by the morally mad, or as perhaps more often nowadays, the cynical. I'd like to quote Vera Brittain, the English socialist anti-war campaigner who as a young woman worked as a nurse during the First World War. Looking back on that period in 1933, she wrote, "Between 1914 and 19, young men and women, disastrously pure in heart and unsuspicious of elderly self-interest and cynical exploitation, were continually rededicating themselves to an end that they believed and went on trying to believe lofty and ideal. To refuse to acknowledge this is to underrate the power of those white angels which fight so naively on the side of destruction." So, to take the most extreme examples of that phenomenon, Hitler harnessed youthful ideals that favored helping the poor, bringing communities together, loyalty, courage, making Germany great again. And it managed to achieve the amount of evil it did because of the amount of idealism that it harnessed. Other dictators who have done far less damage have been less successful, at least in part because they have failed to harness the will to do good, which is so much stronger than the will to do bad. McCarthy reached out to the patriotism, belief in freedom, and class consciousness of the American working class and weaponized it to back his reign of terror, which, as again today, discredited anyone with actual or alleged links to Russia. Liberal interventionists have harnessed the deeply rooted impulse to protect people, to serve the ends of imperialism and the military-industrial complex, which destroy people. But on other occasions, certain ideals are appealed to in order to prevent people acting on other ideals which have more relevance to a given situation. Defenders of Israel's oppression of the Palestinians harness people's revulsion from anti-Semitism and the Holocaust to dampen revulsion at the present oppression and to destroy those who describe it, as my fellow panelist Chris Williamson knows to his great cost. Too often, the accusers, by placing themselves on the side of virtue, seem to acquire a virtue of their own, which raises them above criticism and inspires fear. In Assange's case, the harnessers of idealism have been the press, which, themselves manipulated, have united to assassinate his character. These finely coordinated attacks lend by their coherence an appearance of truth to those attacks and make people resort to such untrue truisms as no smoke without fire. The press has used lies, omission, and obfuscation to engage the positive ideals that oppose rape, the evasion of justice, asylum abuse, and disregard for American lives, in order to disengage the relevant ideals that condemn torture, extraterritorial overreach, and political interference in journalism and the law. Because unlike women against rape, not everyone is morally careful enough to remember that not everybody is guilty as claimed, that individual rights matter even when group interests are at stake, and that there is very often a great deal of smoke without fire. Therefore, those of us who support Assange have to remember that we are up against not just a conspiracy of active malice, vengefulness, and bad faith, or even laziness and lack of interest, but goodwill and good faith adroitly abused. And to deal with that, we have to point that out, as well as get the facts out there as loudly and clearly as we can. And that is what my fellow panelists are doing today.
Hello?
Hello?
Can hear you, Peter.
I can hear you, yeah, sorry.
Okay. Shall I?
Peter's disappeared. I don't know whether you want to perhaps make a start.
I can hear you now. Sorry.
Okay. Can you hear
she's
me
here
now?
now, back. She's back.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry, this technology is new to many of us, so apologies as I try to muddle my way through chairing this session. So I was trying to welcome Peter Oborn, who's a journalist for Middle East Eye and author of The Rise of the Political Class and The Rise of Political Lying, I beg your pardon, and the Triumph of the Political Class. Peter has become increasingly critical of British media and their role in spreading propaganda for the government. Peter's also going to share with us some slightly more, this can be quite a depressing movement, because every time we go to court, we find that no matter what arguments you put before the judge, they get battered away and ignored. So Peter's actually going to bring something a little bit more light and fun into the discussion through a discussion of cricket in the context of Julian Assange. So Peter, over to you, and thank you very much for taking part.
Unmute.
Can you hear me now? Good. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm going to speak as a journalist and as a British citizen. But first of all, I have made this immense discovery, which will mean very little to most people on the panel, but meant a great deal to me. As I was reviewing Wisden, the Cricketer's Almanac, which was published this week, and reviewed the 2020 cricket season, 2019 cricket season. I don't think there's going to be a 2020 cricket season. Unfortunately, it won't introduce that many people, but Wisden has unveiled some important facts about Julian Assange as his cricket career, which I think are new. They certainly were new to me. First of all, his cricketing heritage, not that surprising, being an Australian, of course, but his paternal great-great-grandfather, James Kelly, had 4 sons, all of whom were brilliant cricketers. But more interestingly, I know that he's been badly treated recently by the president of Ecuador, but there's been a bit of a rebellion in cricketing circles in Ecuador on his behalf. Indeed, the Quito, is that the right? Quito Cricket Club, the Quito Cricket Club in Ecuador has offered him honorary membership. And they sent a letter offering him honorary membership of their cricket club to Belmarsh. But he hasn't yet received the letter, hasn't yet answered the letter, hasn't accepted the offer of honorary membership of the Quito Cricket Club. Anyway, let's hope that he's received that letter, and let's hope that, I hope as a cricket lover, that he's going to accept. But also, I am going to launch, I'm going to bring this news further to the world. I have a cricket blog every week, and filling in those long hours when we aren't playing cricket at the moment. And I'm going to bring this news to my listeners next week. I'm going to I've asked Dina to provide, if she can, further information about Julian as a cricketer rather than as a jailbird as he is at the moment. But the things I want to say are very simple, and they are that I am a British journalist, not a particularly distinguished or wonderful thing to be, but nevertheless, that's what we do, and our job is to find out, tell the truth as best we can, and to find out facts. And it has to be said that, and actually, the more we can embarrass powerful people and find governments and businessmen and politicians, the better. That's the general rule that we all act under. And you have to, Julian Assange's achievements in that regard is simply outstanding. You know, he's not just journalist of the year, but journalist of every year in living memory. I mean, and the things I wrote an article for the British Journalism Review a few months ago, you know, and the stuff he's published and discovered and published in a very, puts out there, not in a doesn't spin it. He just puts it out there, these cables, you know, with the atrocity of the US helicopter gunmen laughing as they shot unarmed civilians in Iraq, including a Reuters photographer and his assistant. You know, the revelations about the number of civilian casualties in Iraq, which had been hidden up till that point. I mean, they go on and on. I mean, the US military had killed hundreds of civilians in Afghanistan, previously unreported, the abuse in Guantanamo Bay. These are all very, very significant, important, earth-shattering pieces of information, which any journalist worth his salt would be proud to bring into the public domain. That's in fact what we're there for. And that's why he's had more scoops of great importance than the rest of us journalists put together. And I do feel, and I know he's unconventional, and I also understand he's difficult. I never met him. I never had any dealings with Mr. Assange, but I simply want to say that, and I understand from some people that he's very difficult. Well, so are a lot of very good journalists, so a lot of very talented people. And but I'm here to defend him only in one respect. I'm here to say that his treatment as a journalist, and if you look at this case, it's quite clear he's being punished for the crime of journalism. And I'm ashamed of my colleagues. I was, this time last year, I was on live TV, actually, on CNN. There was some Brexit stuff going on, as there was throughout last year. And there we were on College Green. And talking, and at the last minute, the news came through of that they'd been taken out of the embassy. And so we all just chucked this stuff and immediately reacted. I had two other journalists in there, and they immediately were hostile. You know, this is just good riddance to bad rubbish or whatever. It's a great moment. This man should be hauled out and taken away and extradited. That was, they welcomed that. They were pleased about it. Now, I think that's a betrayal of journalism. There's been a lot of, I don't think they understand the profession, the craft they're in. I watched the way we covered the 2019 general election. I can see the way like that fierce, or the way that coronavirus is being done in this country. And there's obviously the media is failing to report on the coronavirus issue in many ways. And the way in which there is a blindness to the Assange story, when there goes all of us. It's very shortly before last Christmas, the Mail on Sunday. I used to work for the Mail Group. Had a very good front page story. It was about the cables, diplomatic cable sent back by the British ambassador in the United States, in which and somebody had got hold of it. It had been leaked, and the British ambassador was extremely rude about Donald Trump, and that went all, it was sensational stuff, and it was shortly in the run-up of the Tory leadership election, or the general. And Mr. Johnson, who's now Prime Minister, praised the Mail on Sunday for this investigative journalism. He defended it, and when the Metropolitan Police muttered about investigating the Mail on Sunday for this outrageous illegal publication of diplomatic cable, Boris Johnson, Jeremy Hunt, the former Foreign Secretary, and others have all just said, this is outrageous. We support the Mail on Sunday. Exactly the same principle. Exactly the same principle. It applies to Mr. Assange and his publication of diplomatic cables, which have revealed far more important things of great relevance to the world we live in, to the democracy we live in, to the actions of the countries of which we are citizens. So as a journalist, and I'm horrified that there is not a campaign by all newspapers to prevent, to expose the abuses of justice, which we've been hearing about so eloquently, and to stop Mr. Assange facing extradition to the United States, from which he will never return, and get him out of jail, because he's obviously in a high risk category and may die in Belmarsh, and in which case we as a nation would have his blood on our hands. And I do think that is an important, and we as journalists who've just not stood by one of our colleagues, I accept he does different type of journalism, but that is what he's been doing, is finding out facts which didn't want to enter the public, which powerful forces did not want to see enter the public domain. And the final thing I just want to say is, as a British citizen, I believe profoundly in the values of Britain, and they were referred to by Crispin earlier. They are decency, tolerance, free speech. We're very suspicious of the strength and muscle of the state. We celebrate figures like Tom Paine, Cobden, Bright, Keir Hardie, and AJP Taylor, journalists who have Malcolm Muggeridge in the world of journalism, awkward customers who've told ugly truths, difficult truths, which have upset powerful people. That's why, and that's what Britain is about. Bloody-mindedly battling on and standing up for the underdog. the underdog is the great thing that we've done in our history when we've been at our finest. And that's why I feel very strongly that what is happening now to Mr. Assange is a disgrace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for that defense. Just a few facts that those of you on the call might want to keep track of. The Metropolitan Police spent £2 million surveilling the people who, surveilling the embassy while Julian Assange was in. I wonder whether they can find the same amount of money to deal with rape cases. Secondly, also to let you know that a letter was sent to the Queen asking her to intervene in the case of Julian Assange. And I believe she said that because it was a political matter, she couldn't intervene. And we know that Sajid Javid says it's a legal matter, so he cannot intervene. So they'll have to make their minds up, the British establishment, what it is, whether it's a political matter or a legal matter, or it's just one they want to end by, curtailing Julian's life in various ways. Our next speaker is a former Labour MP who's recently set up a grassroots movement. Chris Williamson is hugely well regarded within the left community, hugely well regarded for his courage and for his ability to speak his mind. He has experienced smears firsthand while on the receiving end of an organised witch hunt. And we're very glad that he has always been supportive of Julian, in fact, taking questions to the Houses of Parliament, providing a political voice when he was MP to the case, and setting an example really for other MPs who have now joined in the struggle and who are starting to stand up behind Assange. And this is also a time for me to remind everybody to encourage in all I'll hand over Chris.
It seems so frozen, Deepa. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, Chris. I think go ahead.
Right. Shall I make a start then?
I can hear you, Chris, very well.
All right. Okay. Let me start. Okay. Sorry, I've lost Deepa. She just froze and I couldn't hear anymore. Well, let me start really on the cricket theme. And I certainly look forward to the day when Julian can perhaps join us in the terraces watching an England v cricket v Australia Ashes test match. And hopefully that won't be in the too distant future, because the way Julian has been treated is an absolute scandal. It's a stain on the British state. And look, in my opinion, we need Julian more than ever, because our representative democracy in the Western world, in my opinion, isn't fit for purpose. What we see in the UK, in the United States, is that the mainstream political parties are essentially two sides of the same coin. And I have to ask myself, and I've seen this at close quarters, who are these parliamentarians representing? And maybe that's why, the military-industrial complex has got so much influence. Maybe that's why the United States of America, whilst around 40 million Americans don't have any health insurance whatsoever, why you see millions of American citizens having to sleep on the street, that the American state is able to spend 1.5 trillion pounds on the F-35 jet fighter that doesn't even work. And then we have in this country, in the UK, a government that's prepared to expend billions and billions of pounds on a vanity project, that being Trident, a weapon system that could never be used, whilst at the same time we're seeing in this COVID-19 crisis inadequate supplies of PPE for our health workers. So clearly the system, in my opinion, isn't fit for purpose. And of course, Britain is one of the world's biggest arms exporters. And, I just have to ask the question, and come back to the point, Who is holding politicians to account? Who is holding governments to account? It's certainly not the mainstream media. They're not doing their job appropriately. And as Peter has pointed out, shamefully, journalists haven't come to, with obviously Peter's notable exception and a few others as well, but where are the rest of them? They haven't come to Julian's aid, and they should have been banging the drum, it seems to me, for Julian's case, because this is a question of the freedom of the press. It's a question of freedom of speech. It's a question of ensuring that the public, we the public, have got the information to hold our politicians to account. The media's not doing that. Political opponents in the House of Commons in this country, it seems to me, are not doing that. I mean, the new leader of the Labour Party, the official opposition in the British House of Parliament, Sir Keir Starmer, is reportedly a member of the Trilateral Commission, a shady organisation that Noam Chomsky has recorded a short YouTube video, and if anybody's not seen it, I'd recommend that they download it and watch it. It's only about 2 minutes, and it exposes what the Trilateral Commission is all about. It was established in the 1960s because we were very concerned about what they described as an excess of democracy. You know, the hoi polloi, it seems to me, were getting above their station, and they wanted to, if you like, suppress democracy. That was for the masses. When it came to private business, on the other hand, private business, as far as the Trilateral Commission were concerned, equaled the national interest. And here we have the leader of the official opposition in Britain is a member, allegedly, of the Trilateral Commission. So you have to ask yourself, you know, in whose interests is he speaking? Why is the leader of Her Majesty's opposition a member of an organisation that was concerned about an excess of democracy? And now that Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the race in the United States, it doesn't seem to me to be that there is any real opposition in the States. Joe Biden versus Donald Trump is essentially two sides of the same coin. In the European Union, we have a European Union which is obsessed with neoliberalism. And so we ain't got no democracy, it seems to me. We ain't got democracy, bro. And we need people like Julian Assange. We need Julian Assange to really shine a light on the failings of our democracy so that we can hold our politicians to account. And it seems to me we haven't got the rule of law either. I mean, you can download a copy of the extradition treaty between the United States and the United Kingdom. Here it is. I think you can see it on the screen. I have a copy of it here now. It's the extradition treaty between the UK and the United States. It's very clear. Why on earth is Julian even in prison at all? Why is he facing any prospect of being extradited to the United States? Because this is what the extradition treaty signed by the United States and the United Kingdom says. It says extradition shall not be granted if the offences for which extradition is requested is a political offence. Well, surely Julian's charged with a political offence, is he not? And then he goes on to clarify what offences will not be considered political offences. As you wouldn't be surprised, you know, the murder or the violent crime against the head of state, or the manslaughter, murder, and malicious wounding, and inflicting grievous bodily harm on citizens wouldn't be deemed to fall within the purview of being, you know, not being allowed to be extradited if that was the charge that was put against you. And it lists a number of things, threatening or placing of an explosive and so on. It even then goes on to say towards the end of that Article 4 in the extradition treaty, notwithstanding the terms of paragraph 2, and that's the one that, you know, it clarifies, you know, what couldn't be deemed a political offence, you know, murder, manslaughter, grievous bodily harm, etc. It says, notwithstanding the terms of paragraph 2 of this article, extradition shall not be granted if the competent authority of the requested state determines that the request was politically motivated. Well, this is quite clearly a politically motivated request. Julian Assange shone a light on war crimes by the United States of America. And these arbitrary actions against a man of Julian Assange's standing, they're all reminiscent, are they not, of some sort of tyrannical regime rather than a supposed Western democracy. And I'm just in conclusion reminded of a quotation by Aldous Huxley, who talked about a new kind of totalitarianism. He said that democracy and freedom will be the theme of every broadcast and editorial. Meanwhile, the ruling oligarchy and its highly trained elite of soldiers, police, and thought manipulators, and will be, if I just get the quote, and mine manufacturers will quietly run the show as they see fit. That seems to me to be where we are today with this case against Julian Assange. And as Peter has said, it's really important, therefore, I think, that we stand together with Julian Assange and that we do what we can to embarrass the powerful. This is something that the media should be doing, but they're not. But let's all of us in solidarity stand together and embarrass the powerful. We have the opportunity to lobby our MP. We know what the extradition treaty actually says now. And what is very regrettable, to say the least, that nobody seems to be raising this matter in the House of Commons. And these people are elected by us. So let's embarrass them. Let's ask them, why are you not raising this matter of national, indeed international importance? And I think if we stand together, if we continue to bring pressure to bear, if we build this pressure, then I'm hopeful that justice will prevail and that Julian will be released. And that can't come soon enough.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. As Chris has alluded to there, the persecution of Assange involves the UK being complicit in the breach of both international law and domestic law. And this is in relation to torture, in relation to the way in which they've conducted their investigations, in relation to persecuting a non-violent, peace-loving, highly intelligent journalist, and subjecting him to the potential of 175 years in an American prison, which is in effect a death sentence, if COVID is not here in Belmarsh. And they are trying to prosecute a non-US citizen in US courts where the state has always won. And they are trying to prosecute him without the First Amendment protections of free speech for crimes which are not even offenses in the jurisdictions in which these actions were taken. This is like us saying, okay, we are going to help extradite somebody to China or North Korea or Russia, the traditional bad guys, because, we have an extradition treaty with them and they've asked for it. But this is say an American journalist or a German journalist. Let's see what they would say about that. And actually, we would all be horrified. And why isn't that horror coming out, as Peter and Chris have said repeatedly? Our next speaker is somebody a blogger who knows much more about the inner workings of government than anyone else, I think, that I've read from of the British government. He's done some outstanding court reporting on both Julian and Alex Salmond. He has experience of being stitched up by the establishment. It's Craig Murray, former British ambassador to Uzbekistan. Craig, over to you.
Thank you, Deepa. Can everybody hear me okay? There've been so many great presentations and it's been so comprehensive. It's not immediately obvious what I can add. I would like to add a few things. The first is that so much of this is about security theatre and the demonstrable power of the state and cowing opposition through showing the power of the state. The torture of Julian Assange and the extreme conditions in which he's being held, his mistreatment in Belmarsh jail, his being confined to a glass box, to a large extent, they're doing it because they can, and they're doing it to show us that they can, to demonstrate the power of the state and to make us afraid. That fear is obviously particularly aimed at Kristin, for example, because it's meant to terrify Kristin about what's liable to happen to him and to the other people in WikiLeaks if WikiLeaks continues its work. It's a demonstration of, it's an act of terror. It's designed to terrify us into stopping opposition to the security state and to terrify us into never again releasing evidence of war crimes. And I think when you look at the sheer malicious, the malign way that the judge Vanessa Bereza is conducting the court, and like several of us here have been in the court, and all of us, I think, have just been absolutely stunned by the relentless and remorseless hostility of the judges and of the court, and the lack of even the appearance of civility that normally cloaks the horror of state violence that lies behind court proceedings. All that is an act of terror. It's an act designed to terrify us out of resistance, and that is the purpose of it. And the other thing that absolutely horrifies me, and we've heard several people make comparisons to dictatorships and make comparisons to Nazi Germany. And it's not just, as Peter rightly said, that the mainstream media doesn't stand up to a fellow journalist, doesn't stand up for somebody whose only crime is to release state secrets, and state secrets of showing state atrocities. It's not just they don't stand up for him, they openly attack him, and they do so with glee and hatred. And that is something which I find very difficult to deal with. And again, it goes down to the disappearance of the civilities of society that we all took as a feature of the kind of society we believed we were living in. The attacks on Julian by the mainstream media are just awful. The attitude to Julian of the mainstream media is awful. You go onto Twitter on any discussion of Julian Assange, and you will see countless mainstream media blue-ticked journalists on Twitter coming in to make jokes and callous remarks and nasty things about, oh, he's a rapist, all this absolute nonsense, things which actually they do know to be untrue, but they make them anyway because it's somehow an important part of their group identity as accepted members of the establishment to kick out at those who are other, who are not members of the establishment. And that direction of hatred and abuse at the other is absolutely a sign that we are going in the same direction as Nazi Germany. I'm obviously not saying we're all the way there yet, but it is very, very scary. I find the hatred and vilification, both in the court, the unrelenting attitude of the government, the unrelenting attitude of the magistrate. And I should say, one thing that was very clear to me, particularly during the week-long start of the extradition hearing, is that Vanessa Bereza is being ventriloquized. It's not just that she's coming in with her judgments written out, which is true. We go for this ludicrous charade where she comes in with already written judgments in hand. She sits there for 3 hours, vaguely, barely pretending to be listening to the defense arguments, and then she reads out what she had written before she heard the argument in the first place. Personally, I don't believe that she herself is responsible for those judgments. It may well be her own handwriting. She may have written them down, but I'm fairly confident from close observation of a week in the court. Whenever there were questions being raised, she would fairly quickly move to an adjournment. Then she would go away for 10 minutes, and then she would come back and answer the question. It doesn't have to indicate she's being told what the answer is, but my experience was, my impression was, that is the most likely explanation of what goes on in that court, that she is purely a cipher giving out judgments handed to her by the Home Office. And one of the fascinating things is that again and again and again, she has given judgments against the defense when the prosecution, when the representative of the US government didn't even object to what the prosecution was asking for. The United States government did not object to Julian Assange being seated with his lawyers out of the glass cage. His lawyers made a compelling case that the European Court of Human Rights had ruled that people should not be kept in glass cages during their trial, and also that he is physically and psychologically vulnerable, and that it is normal practice in UK courts for physically and psychologically vulnerable prisoners to be released during the course of their trial and be able to sit next to their lawyers, none of which was rebutted. The United States government stated it had no objection, and still she insisted for no reason at all that I could understand that he be kept in the glass cage. And we saw similar things. The United States government did not object to the postponement of the next stage of the hearing because his lawyers can't have access to him. The United States government were content to go along with postponing the next stage of the hearing to give his lawyers access to enable him to recover his health and to enable witnesses to be brought who wouldn't be able to get here because of coronavirus. And yet, even despite the fact that the prosecution asked for postponement, that the defense asked for postponement and the prosecution did not object, still, the Reizer said, no, you can't have it. And there are 5 or 6 of these judgments where the Reizer refused to go along. Maybe the most striking one was where she claimed that she did not have the ability to stop him being constantly strip searched in the jail. She claimed that she did not have the ability to stop him having his court papers removed from him in prison so he couldn't prepare for his court case the next day. And again, the prosecution said, yes, you do. The defense said she had the ability to ameliorate his prison conditions. The prosecution actually joined in with the defense, saying that is perfectly normal. You can do that. And again, she refused to do it. Initially, on a false claim, she didn't have the power to do that, for which she was very roundly condemned by the International Bar Association. So this isn't to do with what's happening in court. It's not to do with what the prosecution and defense are saying. This is all coming from her. And I think it's all coming on instructions from outside. So what we're seeing is horrifying. I cannot believe that I'm seeing somebody who I regard as a friend being crushed by the state. And that what is happening is extremely obvious to any observer, but it is being cheered on by the media. And I think this is an extremely sorry reflection of the kind of society we are becoming. I think this is seriously worrying. I have one final thing I want to add, which is really a point of information. As Chris Williamson outlined, the government is seeking, and the UK and United States governments in collusion are seeking to export Julian, despite the fact that there is a bar on political extradition in the extradition treaty under which is being extradited. The US and British governments have argued that the 2003 Extradition Act does not have a bar on political extradition. Therefore, the bar on political extradition act in the 2007 treaty cannot be valid, which is very strange because it's only the 2007 extradition treaty that allows the extradition to happen at all. You can't say you're making an extradition under the treaty but ignoring clause 4 of it. That's a very, very strange argument indeed. But that nonetheless is their argument, and it's an argument which the Reizer has shown every sign of favouring. I pointed out to people that I know from my time in the Foreign Office that there must have been a process. When the 2007 extradition treaty was ratified by the UK with the United States, there had to be a process. It's a process I participated in inside the Foreign Office, where it was checked before ratification that the treaty is fully enforceable in UK law, including clause 4. That must have been done. And if clause 4 was not capable of being enforced in UK law, it could not have been ratified. or would have had to have been flagged up for subsequent secondary legislation in order to ratify it. And so I've no doubt at all, in fact, it having been ratified, that the UK government is lying, and that the UK government's own legal advice at the time would have been that Clause 4 can be enforced. I asked people on my blog to put in freedom of information requests for Foreign Office information on the consideration in the Foreign Office of the legal ability to enforce Clause 4 of the extradition treaty. People have now started to get an answer, because that was a few weeks ago. And surprise, surprise, the answer from the Foreign Office is that yes, the Foreign Office does hold information on the ability to apply Clause 4 in UK law, but they cannot release that information because it would be too much work. It would be more than 3.5 days of work, and therefore it would be too costly. That is fascinating, because it's it's a key point that the case revolves around. And just simply to say, and personally, I don't believe them. I mean, I know the Foreign Office system. Even when I left the Foreign Office in 2005, all such documentation was electronic, and it would actually take you 2 hours, maximum 3.5 hours, not 3.5 days, to search it all out electronically and present it. And they're lying in saying it would be too much work to present that information, but they're not prepared to do it. I'm looking to, I'll be doing something on my blog. What I'm looking to do now is see whether we can break it down into a series of information requests, perhaps month by month, so they can't claim, because we were looking at a long period between 2003 to 2007. If we ask for documentation, different people ask for the documentation month by month, maybe we can get at it that way. But the government does have information on the key point, and they are continuing to hide it. Anyway, I think that's all I wanted to say today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. That's fascinating. And I'm hoping that in the Q&A, you will give us there are people on this call who've probably only just heard of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. So if you would give us a summary during the Q&A of some of the issues in the extradition case for those who are not as familiar with your blog, that would be very helpful. Thank you, Craig. Our next speaker is Andrew Feinstein. Very pleased to have Andrew Feinstein here. He's also a member of the local Labour Party in the area that I live, so it's a personal pleasure. And at this moment, I also want to welcome Camden Momentum members who've joined en masse to attend this meeting. There is a particular individual whose birthday it is, whose name I shall not mention, but happy birthday, Luke. And so Andrew is as a former member of the ANC government in South Africa. He's author of After the Party, about South African corruption, and Shadow World, which is about the weapons trade, which has been made into a documentary. Andrew's also a bit of a Twitter star now, with lots of little videos that have been talking about COVID and other issues. He's won numerous awards. He's executive director of Shadow World Investigations and serves quite relevantly in the context of WikiLeaks on the board of the Platform to Protect Whistleblowers in Africa. So Andrew, we're very glad that despite being ill, you've made it to the call. I know if you have a hacking fit, I'm supposed to turn off the video, but I hope you will be able to speak, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Deepa. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Thanks very much for the invitation, and thank you to all of you who've joined this call today. Just listening to the other speakers so far, in particular to Craig's description of the court process, quite honestly reminds me of the farcical legal processes that we used to endure under apartheid, where you had this impression sitting in a court of law that this was all theatre that was being enacted to try and give the impression of due legal process, where it has already been decided that there shall be no due legal process. And it really concerns me that this is happening in the United Kingdom of today. But I suppose, taking the sort of context that Chris Williamson has outlined, we shouldn't be surprised. And why do I say that? Well, I know most of you who are on this call will realize this, but perhaps to some of you coming to this issue more recently, let us just reiterate what Julian Assange is being persecuted for. He's being persecuted for revealing the crimes of the US government and its allies, primarily the US's biggest poodle when it comes to military matters, the United Kingdom. He is being prosecuted for speaking truth to power. And if we are not able to stop this corrupt and illegal process that is currently carrying on, we would not just have failed an individual in Julian. We would have failed the task of truth-telling, the task of journalism, the task of holding power to account. We will also have abandoned the right of every citizen to know what our government is doing in our name and with our money. We should also bear in mind that what Julian has done is he has violated the sanctified code of the national security state. And what do I mean by that? Everything that happens in the domain of national security is hidden behind a veil of national security imposed secrecy. So we look at the specific crimes that Julian and WikiLeaks have revealed, but we remind ourselves that every day similar crimes are happening using primarily American and British weapons to murder innocent civilians in Yemen. As Chris Hedges, the former New York Times war correspondent who was fired for publicly opposing the invasion of Iraq, has said, if citizens were actually shown the true images of the conflicts that we are engaged in, the conflicts that we are providing the weapons and the financing for, if we could see those real images, if we could read the real reports of what was happening in those wars, we as citizens would not allow this to happen in our name. So what Julian and WikiLeaks have done is to bypass that sanctity of national security imposed secrecy and to reveal to us, citizens, what is really being done in our name. And I should just mention, based on my research over the past 20 years, that it is not just the murder and mayhem of war making that is being hidden from us here. It is worth bearing in mind that the global trade in weapons accounts for 40% of all corruption in all world trade. And who benefits from that corruption? Corruption that, for instance, saw the United Kingdom pay members of the Saudi royal family, the son of Margaret Thatcher, Mark Thatcher, and numerous intermediaries, £6 billion in bribes. Who benefits from these bribes? It is politicians, corporate executives, and intermediaries such as arms dealers, banks, auditors, consultants, and lawyers. They make fortunes out of the arms trade and out of our war making. And it is this bribery and corruption that oils the wheels of our corrupted political processes. When one considers the nature of the power of the national security state, one can feel extremely daunted. When one hears the accounts of what is happening in court when Julian appears, one can feel incredibly depressed and powerless. It's a feeling that many people in South Africa grew up with during the worst years of apartheid. And some of us think that as we got towards 1994, when apartheid finally came to an end, that the 10 years previously were probably a time in which we saw a loosening of this, what was effectively an authoritarian, reactionary, racist oligarchy. But in fact, it was the years leading up to the end of apartheid that were amongst the worst to endure for the majority of South Africans, because as the apartheid state claimed that it was starting a process of reform, in the African townships of the country, it imposed even worse repression than had been seen historically. But it never resulted in people on the ground in South Africa and in the international anti-apartheid movement losing hope. At a slightly anecdotal and personal level, I was forced to leave South Africa in the mid-1980s because I'd become involved with the then banned ANC from my late teens, and I was due to be called up for service in the apartheid military. I was taken out of the country, very fortunately. And the night before I was leaving the country at very short notice, I remember sitting above the city of Cape Town, my hometown, and what I, in a probably prejudiced way, regard as one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And I remember thinking to myself that I will never again in my lifetime see this city. Because if anybody had told me in 1986 that 4 years later, the ANC would be unbanned, Nelson Mandela would be released from prison, and 4 years after that, Mandela would actually be elected as a democratically elected president of South Africa, I would have seriously questioned their mental health at the time. But the reality is that that is what happened. And it happened as a consequence of an extraordinary international anti-apartheid campaign and the vast majority of South Africans making their own country ungovernable for the authoritarian regime that try to rule over them. And it's at times like these, when things feel as bleak as they do today in global politics, in the case of Julian Assange, in the really pathetic role that our mainstream media is playing in propping up the status quo, that we should remember these experiences of hope, these experiences of triumph. For if we allow the national security state to continue to do as it pleases, we, all of humanity, will enable the political and economic elite to destroy our planet, to make us far less safe, and to make our world far less democratic. So for all of us who've joined this call, there are crucial things that we can do. We can spread information to as many people as we can about what Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have actually done, which has been a remarkable service to humanity. We can spread information about the nature of the court case and about why Britain is kowtowing to the needs of America in this particular case. Because that is the most powerful thing we have, is the power of information. And it is up to all of us who've been a part of this call to spread that information as widely as we possibly can, so that we can ultimately free Julian Assange, free the truth, and free ourselves from the national security state. Thank you very much.
It was wonderful. I think a round of applause is due for not just Andrew, but all our speakers. Thank you very much for your contributions. I've been quite passive aggressive in running this webinar in terms of keeping people to time, but also in running it as a webinar rather than as a meeting where everybody can contribute, essentially so we can hear the speakers speak and we don't have any untoward elements trying to disrupt the meeting. But we have been looking very carefully at the questions and answers that have been posed. But before I go on to talk about the questions and answers, I'd like to mention a few things which, without which this call would not have been possible. Firstly, we have people dialing in from different parts of the world, not just amongst the speakers panel, which includes people from Iceland, Italy, Scotland, England, and further afield. We also have members of the audience dialing in from Germany, the United States, Australia, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom, and of course, also from the far reaches of the world, including Nepal. So thank you very much to those of you who have joined from all around the world. I haven't mentioned all your countries, but we acknowledge them, and we want your local movements to bring a lot of support in providing your little roadblocks to the way in which this process is carried out. You might think that your little actions don't make any difference, but actually they do. So please keep track of Craig's blogs in terms of things that need to be done. Keep in contact with the Don't Extradite Assange campaign here in the UK, and the Courage Foundation and WikiLeaks, of course, and also the grassroots campaign in the UK, the Committee to Defend Julian Assange, to which I'm particularly grateful, because they have made a contribution of £140 towards reimbursing some of the costs of this Zoom meeting, because it's unbelievably expensive. We have, before I go on to the next part, could I take a couple of questions from the Q&A, and then I have people, you will notice on your screen, participants, that you have something called a raise hands function. So if you would please raise your hand if you want to speak the question yourself. If not, what we will try and do is pick up on groups of questions within the Q&A to answer them. I'm going to take a 2-minute break in this call to allow people to dash to the loo or get a cup of tea if they want to before we go into the questions. But it will also, it's a slightly naughty trick to allow the speakers who've been listening to each other to have a quick look at the Q&A so that they can decide which questions they wish to contribute to. So you have, it is 19:17 UK time by my watch, and I will go until 19:19 for those of you who are recording this online if you want to edit out the section. So I'm going to put myself on mute, and speakers, feel free to stop your videos for just 2 seconds, but stay on the call, please, everybody. We are not leaving the call. Speakers on your panel, you will notice buttons that I'm making answer live for you to be able to look at them and answer live. Okay, we are now at 19:19, and I'm about to start again. Speakers, we will start with a question from Emmy Butlin, who's associated with the campaign to defend Julian Assange. Could I just make sure that all the speakers are back? So I think one of the speakers is not here yet. So I'll take a slightly different question. Question from Carol Archer. I have written to my MP 5 times as I'm increasingly becoming concerned about Julian Assange's case and his health while illegally in Belmarsh. I have received one reply that really told me nothing about her opinion nor her support for Julian. What can I do? How do I hold her to account for not responding to me as one of her constituents? How can I ensure she speaks up about the serious situation that Julian is in now? And this is a question for Chris Williamson, but other speakers, please feel free to contribute if you feel able.
My advice would be to make a nuisance of yourself and to go along to the advice surgery and speak personally to the MP and ask why it is that they've come to the conclusion that they have in the letter that they sent to you. I think it was also be important, though, to try, if you can, find any of your friends and neighbours who feel similarly to yourself, who are obviously in her constituency as well, to also contact her and visit the advice surgery, and really just try and bring as much pressure to bear as you possibly can. And if you have a local newspaper, I think it might also be worth trying to enlist their involvement as well and sort of try and shame the MP. She's not the only one. I mean, I was one of the very few MPs actually who spoke out about the issue when I was an MP before the election in December. And for whatever reason, maybe it comes back to the points I was making in my opening remarks. I'm not sure who the representatives, our representatives, are actually representing, because clearly, if they were representing us, if they were representing the national interest, the public interest, then obviously they would be screaming from the rooftops about what's happening to Julian Assange. So I think, as I say, try and make yourself as big a nuisance as you possibly can. Really just try and force their hand, because obviously MPs who get constituents who are regularly on their case, they will pull their finger out a little bit more. Don't give up. Keep pressing them is what I would suggest.
Thanks, Chris. Kristen, did you want to add something to that, or?
Well, I would like to add something to. I had a glance through the questions that were sent in writing, and maybe I can, if I may, just address a couple of them. Or there was a question of why isn't the Ellsberg defense raised? For those of you know, who actually the case against Daniel Ellsberg, the courageous whistleblower and leaker of the Pentagon Papers, spectacularly collapsed because it was revealed that the FBI had burglarized the office of his psychiatrist and stolen his documents. And when that was revealed, it was such an infringement that the case collapsed. It had a serious effect on that. I guess the implication was that now we have for certain knowledge that there was spying, recording, video and audio recording, and stealing of documents from the meetings of Julian's with his defense lawyers in the Ecuadorian Embassy. And in fact, after he was taken out of the embassy, the hard drives and the documents that were seized were sent directly to the United States from the Ecuadorian Embassy. So how on earth can you have a fair trial in the US? So I mean, that should be obvious. You cannot have a fair trial. So I mean, that should be enough. And I was trying to explain it earlier, to dismiss this extradition request entirely. That should be enough in itself. I don't have an clear answer to that, but maybe Daniel Ellsberg will have the best answer himself, because he told me a few years ago in person when I met him, what a fantastic personality. But he said, if my episode in the early 70s under the dark clouds in the Nixon era was happening under today's situation, I would never have seen the day of light again. I would have been thrown in prison and left there to rot until the day I died. So that's how bad things have gone to worse since the early 70s. From a period where I was a teenager and I just have a reflection back then, and it was a horrible period of the Vietnam War and FBI doing horrible things, trying to frame people and get them to commit suicide and what have you. So that's what we are today. We are in a worse state than what my generation reflects back as being the Dark Ages, when the dark forces ruled. It's worse, it's darker, it's more sinister, and we have complicity across the board, especially in journalism, which is very close to my heart, because I decided to dedicate my life to that field. Somebody asked, what about
Kristen?
A ruling to the, yes, sorry.
Sorry, I was just wondering if on that particular point, if anybody else wanted to comment. And what we will do is, if I may, is I will take some more questions for the speakers who are here. Just so everybody knows, just in terms of the timing, we are hitting a hard deadline at 8 o'clock because there is a Courage Foundation call, funnily enough, with Daniel Ellsberg, chaired by Aaron Mate, and with some interesting speakers. So you might want to reserve the Ellsberg type questions for that call. But just coming back to very practical things, there was a request for Craig, who has suddenly disappeared off the screen. Okay. Could we have somebody talk about, hello? Can you still hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Could we get some information from Craig and others about what is the situation against, what is the potential, maybe Kristen, you can also contribute to this, what is the potential to take up actions against misfeasance in public office through crowdfunding, legal help against the kind of corruption that we see? And that question was from a number of people, including Linda Richardson. So thank you, Linda, for your question.
I don't know if you want me to speak because you silenced me, but earlier.
Sorry, Kristen, I didn't mean to silence you. Please go ahead.
But I mean, it's part of another issue I was going to raise. But somebody asked, can't you take the court? Can you take this case to the European Court of Human Rights to ask for a intermediary ruling on the matter? But what we are told that we have to exhaust all methods within the country before that can actually happen. But if somebody want to pick up on that case, I'm not too versed in the possibility of the path that you were asking about. Now I've lost you, Deepa, as well. There you are.
Sorry, I should be back now. When Craig returns, we will come back to this question about misfeasance in public office. Kristen, could you give us an idea of what happens when, or rather than if, when Vanessa Baressa finds against Julian, and what are the channels of appeal that we would expect to see?
Well, we have the path of the appeal to the appeal court, and then to the Supreme Court, and well, hopefully to the European Court of Human Rights. So there's many years down the road, which hopefully you don't have to take, because this must come to an end very, very soon. But those paths are available, of course. If I may, I was asked, how is Julian? By somebody on the question, the Q&A, and it so happens that he called me up. He got an opportunity to call me up just 10 minutes before the session started, and we had a little talk. And I just want to, I know it's a bit sort of a personal, but maybe people want to hear this, but he is coping with a really difficult situation where the danger is he is locked up, but the danger is coming from the outside. The prison guards are the person who are coming in shifts and actually bringing in the danger every day, and it's very hard to guard yourself from that. But he is hanging in there. He's a really strong personality, and what is amazing is that, of course, when we do have conversations over the phone, which is not very often because it's limited. I try to be upbeat. I try to, of course, be positive. Hang in there, and I try to have some jokes and have some laughs. But it's extraordinary that he is occupied, as always, with the grand picture. He is thinking about the COVID, how we could spread information, how we could be of value in that community, and as a media organization. And I think it's extraordinary. It says a lot about the person that I came to know and befriend more than a decade ago. He is still concerned about information, what is happening in the crackdown on personal freedom under COVID, all the elements that we've spoken about throughout the years. And this is the person that should be really worried about his life every minute of the day. And I'm saying this as a praise to him as a friend and as a thinker and as a dedicated journalist and an information activist. And I just want to share it with you because somebody asked, how is Julian? He's not well and he's a bad place. But I still keep pumping in information about all the support he is getting, and I know it is registering, and he is appreciative. But he's a remarkable person. He is resilient. It's remarkable that he hasn't given up a long time ago, but he has not. But I don't know how long he can take this.
Our next question, I think the screen is frozen a little bit, so I'm not back on my computer, but our next question is for Stefania Marisi. There's a question for you on the Q&A section, Stefania, and I also want to acknowledge the people who are patiently waiting with their hands raised in the actual room. So I will come back to you, but Stefania, there's a question as to, could you please publish all the documents that you have so far? And also, could you publish the kinds of comments you have made today? That's the question. Is that possible, Stefania? That's the question to you.
So the documents, the most relevant documents I have published already, and in my investigation, which are available in English and in Italian as well. And as for publishing everything, the full set of documents, I'm still litigating. So I'm waiting until I'm able to litigate this Freedom of Information Act. And the good thing is that next week, I will start litigating with the US State Department because they are completely refusing the document. So as for publishing everything, the full documentation, I still want to litigate the case. I can publish what we discussed today, of course. I have published most of my speeches whenever I was invited. As for the Freedom of Information Act, I'm litigating on four jurisdictions. So it takes a lot of time, energies, and money. And, I'm doing this in my personal capacity because none of the newspaper I work and I'm still working support this kind of work. So I'm doing it myself. And initially I paid myself in my personal capacity. And now I was able to get a grant just for paying the lawyers. Most of them, or if not, almost of them work for very little. Some of them work for nothing. So just because they want to find the truth, they want to unearth facts. And I have huge respect for the huge work they have done.
Thank you, Stefania. Peter, a question for you. is it possible for you to start a national journalists campaign, kind of animating some of the things you've talked about today, including writing about what you've just said today in the media? Peter, you're on mute. Peter, you're on mute. You need to unmute yourself. Peter, we still can't hear you. He's just looking to check that he's plugged in. I'm going to unmute you, Peter.
I've unmuted myself.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well done.
So I apologize, and I'll have to, by the way, I'll have to run after this next question. It's a very important question. I've written to offer a piece to various papers, and I'll continue doing that. I'm also going to try and stir up some of my colleagues who've so far been very uninterested and convince them that they should write and engage and campaign on this. This is a issue which goes absolutely to the complete heart of what journalism and newspaper is and what newspapers are. The ability to publish without fear or favor facts which expose wrongdoing by governments and to cast a light on the foreign policy and the way in which people have been treated of what we've done abroad in a collective and in a national capacity. So I just cannot see the argument here, which wouldn't absolutely understand, a newspaper man wouldn't understand, particularly since it can apply to anybody who annoys the US authorities, and you have a complicit or a cowardly or a gutless British government which is happy to go along with your extradition to the United States, and that's that, because you're not going to come back. Mr. Assange has been poorly treated in a number of ways, and if he turns up in the United States, I think that's the last, I'm afraid to say, that we will see of him outside a jail cell. So yes is the answer to your question. It's well past time, and thank you for stirring me up by asking it.
Thank you very much, Peter. A question for Craig and others about what are the steps that people can take in their local communities, but also in terms of influencing the legal process, particularly in relation to misfeasance in public office through crowdfunding, to say that the way in which the rule of law is being undermined is unacceptable, particularly, for example, in the case of Paul Close, in the case of Arbuthnot's conflicts of interest, which have been raised by a few of the people asking questions, and also in relation to the way in which the British and the Swedish have colluded to deny Julian justice, and of course other things related to the case in terms of documentation going missing, Julian's own rights to his privileged conversations with his lawyers, his rights to having documentation before trial, etc., etc. So Craig, could you speak a little bit about that, and then we could also take an answer from Chris in relation to that. Craig, you'll need to unmute yourself, please.
Does that do it?
If other speakers could just mute themselves so that we don't get any disturbance.
Right. On the first point, the amount that ordinary people can do to actually influence the legal process is very little, bluntly. If I could influence the legal process, I certainly would, but I can't. And one point I would want to make is that Julian has absolutely a first-class legal team. He has the best legal team you could possibly get. I know that sometimes people of goodwill, people who are supportive, wonder why the legal team don't put in certain motions at different times, why they don't do things in a different way. And the answer to that is, I am not an extradition lawyer or defense lawyer, and I can't tell you, but I do absolutely trust Gareth Peirce. I would trust Gareth Peirce with my life, and in fact, I did trust Gareth Peirce with my life in a very real sense when she looked after me when I left the Foreign Office and became a whistleblower myself 15 years ago. I'm absolutely confident that he has the best legal team he possibly could have, and that they had reasons for their strategy, even when they're reasons which I myself, not being the kind of legal experts that they are, but I myself don't absolutely understand. So what the public can do to assist with the legal process is very little. I personally don't believe there is a real legal process. I really do believe it's entirely theatre and charade at this stage. And I very much fear that there won't be any serious legal hearing until we get to appeal in the High Court. The difficulty is whether Julian can survive the prison system that long. That was a great worry even before COVID-19. It is now an instantaneous worry. Where people can help, I think, is that people ought urgently to be pressing in the normal ways by getting as many people as you possibly can to contact your member of parliament, to write letters to the local paper, to do all the kind of normal community activity on the question of release at this moment during the COVID crisis, of Julian being allowed out on bail, the hearing being delayed, the humanitarian case. I mean, obviously, this case should never be happening in the first place. The ability of ordinary people to affect that is rather small. At the moment, we have an immediate, urgent emergency to get him out of jail pending his extradition hearing while this epidemic is on. And that is a very clear humanitarian point, which is easy to make. And that's something which I would recommend people to concentrate their campaigning on instantly. But Chris may want to come in and add to that.
Craig, did you have anything to say about misfeasance in public office before we move to Chris?
Well, only sadly, it's very, very seldom prosecuted and very difficult to prosecute it. I'm not sure it's ever been successfully prosecuted against a judge, certainly in modern times.
Even against the CPS, then, Craig?
Yeah, I looked myself. I mean, when the Foreign Office, as people know, when I became a whistleblower, the Foreign Office tried to frame me on a whole series of false charges that were very plainly ill-motivated. I was acquitted of all of them, and most of them were very, very plainly quite easy to show they were fabricated. And I took legal advice myself on suing Jack Straw for misfeasance in public office and some of the officials involved in bringing those false allegations against me. And the firm legal advice I got was that misfeasance in public office, although it's often bandied about, in practice it is almost never prosecuted. It's almost a dead letter of the law. That there are very, very few successful prosecutions ever, and it just wasn't worth going down that route. And I'm sorry, I know that's a negative answer, but that's my understanding. If anyone knows better, I'd be interested to hear. But my own understanding is that misfeasance is a wonderful principle and a very good law. People ought to be able to be prosecuted for misfeasance in public office, but in fact, it almost never happens and almost never successfully happens.
Thank you, Craig. Chris, did you want to add to that?
Well, I would agree with Craig's comments about the importance of really building, I think what I was saying, really kind of doing all those traditional things, writing letters to the press, speaking to your member of parliament. But I think in addition to that, knowledge is power, as I was saying, and this is really what Julian is all about, really bringing to the public's attention what those who are in power are actually doing, many of them in our name. And I think one of the things which I think local people who are concerned about this issue is to encourage discussion in the various organisations, community groups that you might be a member of, to try and raise the awareness of this issue, because the media is not doing its job. A lot of people are unfamiliar with the situation in relation to Julian Assange. A lot of people have been misled about the false accusations, about what happened in Sweden and so on. And so I think that is really going to be key to do what we can to continue to build this movement. Doing all those things that I've said that Craig has suggested, but in addition to that, try and encourage discussions with local community groups that you might be involved with, so that we are building more awareness about this terrible injustice which is being perpetrated in our name, and making the point that, look, what Julian is doing, what he's done, is actually, shine a light on the abuse of state and corporate power. And it's in all our interests to have someone like Julian and others to actually do that, because unless we can hold these people that have this power to account, they're going to continue to abuse it. And that's why, many of the injustices outside of Julian's case are being perpetrated right across this country and indeed the world, where, as I was saying in my opening remarks, there seems to be a greater priority on the military-industrial complex and selling arms around the world than it is on actually dealing with climate change and dealing with the health crisis that we're currently confronted with, and the housing crisis, and so on. So we need people like Julian, but we need to spread the word. And I would urge people who are listening into this to sort of go back into the community and any groups that they're involved with, get those discussions going and get people clued up on what this case is actually all about.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to take 3 questions from the audience now. There are 3 people who've been waiting very patiently. The first of those is under an account called GWS. So GWS, you now have talking permitted. Could you please make your comment or question, please?
Hello, this is Lisa, actually, from Women Against Rape. I'm borrowing somebody's computer, which is why you have a strange banner there. But I wanted to just point out that on the chat, I have put some links to articles that we've written, which is a useful way to spread information around to disprove the allegations of sexual offences against him. And I think it's important for people to know that the way the allegations have been handled by the Crown Prosecution Service and the Swedish investigators have been very, very corrupt. And there is quite a bit of documentation about that, which we have helped to write and publish. And just to say that, remind people that he has never been charged, and yet he is repeatedly labelled a rapist in the media. And also, this is a very convenient way for the authorities to whip up a witch hunt against him, and that if there were any validity to the allegations that were written by the Swedish police and not supported by at least one of the women who walked out during questioning, they would have pursued Julian Assange and they would have questioned him while he was in the embassy, because he was perfectly available there. And that's an absolutely normal procedure for investigators and prosecutors to do. So the fact that they kept saying, oh, we can't do that, is rubbish. Anyway, so people are welcome to be in touch with us, and please do read our stuff and get it around.
Thank you, Lisa. That's really helpful. Just on that note, all the speakers, if you wouldn't mind, we've received separate requests for each one of you to please give us your notes or your speaking slides, which I can help collate and we can share. In terms of the next question, what I'd like to do is take the person who is with the handle Galaxy J4. I'm now allowing you to talk using this control. Sorry, it's a little bit fiddly. So hopefully you'll be able to speak, Galaxy J4. We can hear you now, Galaxy J4. Could you speak a little bit louder, please? Okay. I'm afraid the person who was with that account has muted themselves again. Would you unmute yourself, please, and speak? Okay, I'm going to leave this and turn to the next question, which is Could Joe please ask her question? JC is your little logo.